Legal aid services around the country say their budgets are increasingly stretched and they're struggling to cope with demand. In WA, the service chief says even people in critical need of legal assistance are missing out. But as Anna Vidot reports, it's not just a West Australian problem.
When the Whitlam government created the Australian Legal Aid Office in 1973, Attorney General Lionel Murphy said it would take the law to the people who need it most. 40 years later, and Legal Aid WA's director George Turnbull says that's getting harder and harder to do.
There are many people, very deserving people, who unfortunately we're not able to aid.
Together, the Commonwealth and the state and territory governments are responsible for the bulk of legal aid funding. In 1997, the Howard government cut the Commonwealth's contribution to those state organisations' budgets from more than half to about a third. George Turnbull says that's continued under the Coalition and Labor and has had some pretty significant consequences.
We're only in a position to fund those matters which are at the extreme end, where we have issues involving family violence and where there are children at risk.
And George Turnbull says things are unlikely to improve anytime soon. He says the number of Indigenous Australians accessing legal aid in WA has increased 70% over the past 3 years because Aboriginal legal services have also been cut back. They're facing further cuts which will come into effect next year.
And of course that adds an additional strain on our budget.
It's not just Western Australia.
The current situation is dire and bitterly disappointing.
Dr David Neal SC sits on the Law Council of Australia's Access to Justice Committee.
The current situation across the whole country is, unless it's assessed that you are likely to go to jail, you will not get a grant of legal aid in a magistrate's court. That means lots and lots of people, and I'm particularly worried about young people, will confront a court charged with a criminal offence and not represented.
Why is it the Commonwealth's responsibility to make sure those people have legal representation?
Because equality before the law requires that people get proper legal advice and proper representation. That's simply not happening for thousands and thousands of people.
David Neal is concerned there's no real political will to stop the Commonwealth's declining contribution to legal aid, which took another hit in this year's federal budget. And he says that will ultimately be costly to Australia's bottom line and to its justice system.
It just means that you run a system which is vastly more costly to run because the people coming before the courts don't know what they're doing. Where someone is sent to jail when they shouldn't have been, that's $123,000 per annum per prisoner. Then there's the dependents of that person who are on some form of welfare benefit. It is massively costly purely in economic terms, but the social and psychological costs of it to say, well, look, we have a promise here of equality before the law, but actually we don't take it seriously at all, or certainly not seriously enough to warrant spending the money, which would provide a minimally adequate system, and ours is not even close to minimally adequate.
David Neal SC from the Australian Law Council, ending Anna Vidot's report. People who